Well, this is Fred Miller. I'll just say this is the March meeting of the Southeast Michigan Sierra Club's monthly programs on the first Thursday of every month. This is a program dedicated to data centers. And I welcome all the people who've come and who are still coming in. Uh, uh, Data centers have exhibited an enormous boom in building and in proposals here in Michigan over the last 6 months to a year. And they've become one of the central issues in many communities around the state. They've become a state issue and a national issue. And this is the kind of topic that we take up monthly at the Southeast Michigan Sierra Club Group's monthly meetings. Data centers, the issues that they raise kind of sit at the crossroads of two of the biggest challenges that humanity faces, or it really has ever faced, climate change and artificial intelligence. And how we handle data centers could undermine the energy transition that's key to limiting climate change. So it's a key issue here. It's a key issue in Michigan, and Michigan is important to this country. The debates and decisions we make on data centers will have an impact. So I'm very happy to see a big crowd for this, to learn about data centers, the risks they face, the policies we need to address them, the actions that the Sierra Club is taking, and how you can join in. To give us an overview of what data centers do, the problems they create, the potential solutions, we're very thankful to have two analysts with us from Fresh Coast Climate Solutions. Fresh Coast is located here in Ann Arbor, on the Fresh Coast, I guess, right? I love that name. There's an East Coast and a West Coast, and we are the Fresh Coast. Terrific. Fresh Coast Climate Solutions is dedicated to providing technical and policy analysis to companies, investors, nonprofits, and governments who seek to make positive contributions to greenhouse gas reduction and the prevention of climate change and its impacts on our communities and our world. We have from Fresh Coast Climate Solutions, we are very pleased to have with us Gunnar Carlson and Abby McDowell from Fresh Coast Climate Solutions, both of which have been studying and working on climate issues and how data centers are impacting that. Gunnar Carlson studied environmental engineering, received his Bachelor of Science at West Point, and is now a candidate for a master's in public affairs at the University of Michigan. Abby McDowell has a BS in environmental science from the University of Wisconsin and a master's degree in environmental policy from the University of Michigan, and worked on Great Lakes climate resiliency issues for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration before she joined Fresh Coast. After we hear from Gunnar and Abby, we will also hear from Tim Minotis, the Michigan Sierra Club's legislative and political director on data center legislation, and Brian Smigielski, the Sierra Club's Michigan campaign organizer who specializes in climate and energy issues and will bring us up to date on the campaign to influence the Michigan Public Service Commission and obtain protection for Michigan communities against the adverse consequences of data center and data center power usage. So with that, I will hand it over to Gunnar and Abby.
Yeah, as Fred said, my name is Abby McDowell. I'm really glad to be here with you all tonight, and I really appreciate Sierra Club inviting us to this important conversation. Um, we, as Fred said, we've been tracking the rapid growth of data center development and what it means for the environment and for communities. So we're excited to share our learnings with you. And yeah, we're just excited for the opportunity to share with a community like Sierra Club that is deeply committed to environmental stewardship. So we're gonna talk through some of the emerging trends that we're seeing in data center development and the environmental community impacts associated with them. I know Fred gave a great overview already of Fresh Coast, but just a bit of further background, we're a sustainability consulting firm. We work with clients to move the needle on climate action in tangible ways. Um, we have three main focus areas at Fresh Coast, climate and carbon, sustainability, and water and nature. And we do a variety of work in all of these different focus areas, including greenhouse gas, helping organizations understand their greenhouse gas footprint, climate action planning, and water and biodiversity impact and risk understandings among some of our other services. We're also now a part of Cascade Energy, which is a leading energy efficiency firm working throughout the United States. Um, we work with a variety of clients from startups to small and large businesses, municipal governments and foundations, nonprofits, including the city of Sterling Heights, Grand Rapids, Muskegon. We've also worked with some companies like Patagonia and the University of Michigan. So a diverse background in the folks that we get to work with. Our team has been studying the data center industry and its impacts and practices, and communicating our findings to foundations such as the Joyce Foundation, as well as other NGOs, policymakers, and utilities to inform decision making. Um, I think, as we mentioned earlier already, we've been compiling some of our research for the Joyce Foundation on emerging trends and better practices, and doing work to understand energy efficiency from a utility perspective, as well as working to convene different stakeholders to share information to inform decision making for uh, data center development. And we can share our slides after this discussion, but this is also available on the Joyce Foundation's website, but just a link to some of the work that we've been doing surrounding data centers, some of the webinars, and we do biweekly updates as well on different trends that are emerging in this space. So that's just further information for everyone. But next, I'll get into some of the emerging data center trends and insights. Then we'll discuss the landscape in the Great Lakes region and in the state of Michigan specifically, and then discuss our understanding of what we're calling better practices that could mitigate harm or have different outcomes for data center development. And again, we are excited to have this discussion. At the end, we're going to have a Q&A as well, and look forward to all of your feedback. So first, getting into the landscape in the United States. More generally, the University of Virginia has compiled this map that showcases energy and economic impacts across the nation. The United States has the largest data center footprint globally, with a large cluster uh, in Northern Virginia, which is coined as Data Center Alley. But there, as you can see, there's growing clusters across the nation, including in the Great Lakes region, namely in Chicago and Columbus. U.S. electricity demand from data centers is growing and is likely to continue to increase very rapidly. So we had 4.4% of the country's electricity demand consumed by data centers in 2023. And this is the terawatt hour equivalent of the consumption of the entire state of Florida. And there's a projected 12% by 2028, which is nearly 3 times the consumption of Florida. So, as you can see, very rapidly increasing consumption. From a water standpoint, as you can see, these are the three main types of data centers. We have hyperscale, co-location, and enterprise. Of these types, hyperscale facilities have the largest water consumption, with up to 1 to 5 million gallons of water consumed per day, which could be the equivalent of a town of 10 to 50,000 people. It's also important to note that water impacts from data centers aren't limited to what the facilities directly use on site. There can be a significant amount of water that is used indirectly from these data centers and tied to their electricity demand, driving a much larger water footprint. So, of course, we know that there are other big water users in the region, including critical mining as well as agriculture, but since data center growth is happening so rapidly, the impacts on water can feel a lot more localized. So a key challenge here is the variability from one data center to another. The metrics aren't consistently tracked or reported, and we'll talk a bit more later about the practices that can be taken. But I think the main point here is on a site-by-site basis that there should be more transparency and disclosure from the developers about how much water is being consumed. So what do developers look for when they are looking for a location for a data center? There's a variety of different things. We are seeing increasingly community pushback being a larger factor, but at the top of this list is still the ease of interconnection. Developers are firstly looking for sites where they can quickly and cost effectively connect to the power, transmission lines, and high capacity fiber. So if those pieces are already in place, a site can be a lot more attractive. But as you can see, there's a lot of other factors that are considered as well for location. Okay. And as you all know, I'm sure that data center investment is exploding. As we spoke about a little bit earlier, it's mainly driven by a lot of it is driven by AI. There are U.S. Announcements that are projected 1.5 to 2 trillion dollars of investment of data centers by 2030, and there are global estimates of this reaching 5 to 7 trillion dollars. So as we know, this has led to a rush for land grabbing, water, and power. And there's growing concerns about an investment bubble and what the community and environmental impacts of such this rapid push out could be. So as I mentioned earlier, the Great Lakes region is a increasingly growing area for data centers. This is due to a number of reasons, including the amount of land and water that we have available, as well as access to transmission and infrastructure fiber lines, as well as our cooler, more moderate climate and access to major cities. So next I'll hand it off to Gunnar to talk a little bit more about specifically what is happening in Michigan and the Great Lakes region.
All right. Thank you, Abby, for that great overview of the national level. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about what's going on in the state and the region. So what's happening in Michigan? As in most states in the U.S., a lot. I will highlight that Michigan, compared to the other 8 Great Lakes states, actually has a far lower number of proposals. Partly that's due to the fact that it was one of the last states in the Great Lakes to offer a 6% sales and use tax exemption for qualified data centers. And that was brought into effect in about April of last year. And since then, we've seen a major uptick in activity. Some estimates about 16 to 20 billion-plus-dollar proposals for hyperscale data centers across the state. But we'll talk about a couple specific examples that have been really informative and are, going to teach us a little bit about more of the trends that are happening statewide. And those two examples are Saline and Ypsilanti. Those are two of the biggest developments that are currently scheduled to move forward. And I think a lot of the people in this group may be familiar with what happened in Saline. But back, quick synopsis of last year, Saline Township was approached by a large developer, Related Digital, backed by OpenAI for a Project Stargate AI data center initiative that was $7 billion of expense projected. And basically, the developers applied from agriculture to industrial rezoning, and the township denied that zoning request and then was sued. And then that lawsuit ensued with a settlement agreement that is informative for potential precedent setting. This is the first example that at least I'm aware of in which a developer sued the township for exclusionary zoning and came to this outcome. Ypsilanti is another contentious development that has faced a lot of pushback from locals. One key to this site, it's a partnership between the University of Michigan and Los Alamos National Laboratory. And it's supposedly going to be used for federal and academic research, but community members have pushed back on a litany of issues, partly what the research will be used for, which developers have admitted will be for nuclear weapons research in part. Also, due to the partnership under the auspices of the university, community members of Ypsilanti have been left out of the process in many ways because they don't have the same zoning authority due to that university partnership. So what has this meant for the greater state of Michigan? We've seen a lot of townships enact moratoria ranging from as short as 60 or 90 days to up to a year in some cases. And these moratoria are aimed at understanding the impacts of these massive facilities that have immense power, hunger, water consumption, what kind of community impacts and economic impacts are going to happen. And these townships feel that they need to hit the pause button. And so we've seen at least 19 or more moratoria passed by local municipalities within really just the last few months. That includes the city of Saline, although the town of Saline already has to contend with the development happening in its territory. I will also mention, as Abby did earlier, about the effectiveness of community pushback, which has definitely happened in several of these proposals. Not all of these proposals that are happening across the state are going to become developments, namely Howell Township. Recently, I believe it was in December, the developer, which was backed by Meta for $1 billion+ investment there, withdrew their application for a rezoning request. So we have seen some real uptick in that local pushback. And then I'll highlight as well the sales and use tax exemption. Again, Michigan being one of the later states to bring that to entice developers to its state. But there's a real tension between the state wanting that economic development opportunity, but then not saying where to go next or what to do next, and not having a coordinated response on, what about our state's climate goals and our carbon neutrality goals? And what about our resource consumption plan? How much water, how much electricity can we coordinate and plan around and not just shoot for the short-term economic development opportunity? I want to do a quick comparative snapshot of Michigan to other states in the region, like I mentioned earlier. And as you can see here, there's a lot of pending legislation happening in the Great Lakes states. Michigan, most recently, within the last month, enacted bill proposals for 1-year moratorium statewide on data center construction. We'll see what the outcome of that is. But that's telling as to how much of a political hot button issue this has become, and seeing the local communities pushback increase. We also have seen some Senate bills proposed just at the end of last year to impose water withdrawal limits, as well as mandatory disclosures, and then cost protections for ratepayers for water infrastructure. And we're seeing some state lawmakers rethink the strategy of tax exemptions, especially with one of the main economic development benefits that a data center could bring would be capturing the tax revenue that comes from it. And so with the tax incentives in place, potentially missing out on extremely high volume of tax base. Minnesota is leading because they established and actually enacted qualified data centers legislation that introduces the data centers as a really a new type of entity to be regulated from all different aspects of its environmental, energy, and other permitting requirements. So we consider that to be one of the better practices that we mentioned earlier. And you can see a lot of the other states are following suit and thinking through how do we regulate, not just understand, but then regulate these massive developments. We'll do a quick deep dive into Selene, like I mentioned earlier. I wanted to just highlight the press that this got, local, state, and even some national, and introduce these photos here that really highlight the contrast between these small and sometimes rural local communities that are forced to contend with multi-billion-dollar backers for these projects. So as I mentioned, in September, the developer filed the lawsuit, and by October, it was settled. And I believe it was the deal relatively unknown. The developer being OpenAI and Oracle, or the backers being OpenAI and Oracle, was not even well known or publicized until really after the settlement agreement came to pass. And there's been a lot of controversy since. State Attorney General Dana Nessel has gotten involved to assess the project, criticize its lack of transparency as well as its environmental and economic impacts. So I won't go into this entire slide, but I want to highlight a couple things. One is the timeline, and the second is the settlement agreement. So what I want to mention about the timeline is, again, how quickly all of this took place. The rezoning application happening in July, and the township, due to public pushback and their concerns, denied that rezoning request, and then by October have this lawsuit settled. And so I want to point to the settlement agreement, which outlines, really, honestly, they did a good job of, the township did a good job of having to get up to speed so quickly on the potential economic and environmental impacts, and get up to speed on how they could introduce certain requirements to offset that in their position. But I would ask, how can we do better? How can we prevent this from happening in the first place? But also, how can we learn from this to see if a development is to happen? I know there's a lot of moratoria. Perhaps there could be a statewide moratorium. But in the case that developments, when they do, if they do happen, how can the community be more prepared? And what can they ask for? And what is their menu of options? What's their playbook? So you see some of the outlined items from the agreement. A lot of it, millions of dollars contributed to, the fire department or the community investment fund. Those things are great, but we would want to ask, how much was the community able to engage in that? How much time was there to plan what these community benefits look like? And so we see some key opportunities for this. Again, amidst the environment of local moratoria, and a lot of people realizing how much they have to take a pause to understand this situation, taking a look at local ordinances as well as state legislation to recognize this new and unique challenge, and come up with some prepared, defined ways to regulate, and proposals to introduce when a big developer comes knocking on your community door. So what do we mean by better practices? We've compiled a list of better practices and synthesized them into these 6 categories. We reviewed about 100 or more of the country's largest data center developers and operators, as well as their financial backers. And we've taken a look at their public sustainability reports, which at our glance, currently only around half of these companies even release a voluntary corporate social responsibility or sustainability report. And that's one of the biggest weaknesses right now, is that there isn't a lot of apples to apples comparison with the data and the disclosure that's out there. And it's voluntary disclosures that are kind of leading this analysis. But we've compiled some of these different categories of what we consider to be more responsible or mitigate the negative environmental and community benefits, or mitigate the negative environmental community harms while potentially maximizing any other economic benefits or other benefits. So the top line of the three would be more resource and technology focused better practices, efficiency, load management, and clean energy. And then the bottom three will be really more focused on behavioral change and trust building activities, really coming from private industry in cooperation with any communities that they may engage with. So for efficiency and load management, really want to mention that for the massive uptick in energy demand that comes along with these data centers, efficiency and load management and essentially allow the grid's plan to build additional capacity, additional transmission and distribution, additional energy generation to meet this demand. But if data centers can reduce their amount of demand or shift the time of that demand, it could potentially lessen significantly the amount of extra infrastructure that needs to be built. And if that's the case, then those costs will not be passed along to ratepayers because, as many of you may understand about utilities, they build around peak demand. They need to build more transmission infrastructure, and those costs end up getting passed to the ratepayers. We're seeing that take place. So efficiency and load management would be two better practices. And I want to highlight a couple of metrics, power usage and water usage effectiveness. Those are some of the common metrics that we're seeing corporations disclose. But those are some things that with further research and analysis could be embedded in local ordinances and more stringent requirements to reinforce the necessity of more efficient and more responsible resource management. And then with load management, this isn't just a technology solution of shifting the timing of the demand, but also thinking about how could potentially developers invest in local community energy, producing energy generating or energy saving opportunities that could lower rates for community members. I'm talking about home retrofits, heat pump installation, electrification projects and partnerships with commercial and industrial partners for district heating. These are just some of the innovative ideas that would reduce that electric demand. And then for clean energy, when there is new generation that must be built, it's imperative for the climate that is with renewable sources. And I want to mention too that Abby talked about the off-site energy use, the water impacts due to that thermoelectric power generation really increase the amount of water consumption that is so precious to us in the Great Lakes. And the cleanest sources of energy like wind and solar are the least water consumptive. And the highest water consumers being natural gas and coal and nuclear energy. So as we clean our grid, that will also reduce the water consumption as well. And then finally, I want to end on this slide more on the behavioral change that we see is needed, and we see a real lack in the industry of providing this, but we're seeing more interest. Even most recently, Microsoft realized with all the national pushback, they've developed a community first playbook that focuses on this public-private coordination. But again, I think legislation and ordinances are going to be required with some teeth to require transparency and actually get communities engaged. Here we just have a couple other concepts that aren't in the emerging better practices because we haven't seen as much from like sustainability reports and public information, but some better ideas as well. Again, maximizing local community benefits. And I talked about the home retrofits or ways to lower local energy bills, but also just aligning with the community on those different types of benefits and what does the community want. And then finally, the informed local decision making. This is really where there is a gap right now. There's really a lack of information, good information out there, especially when it comes to these individual site level lack of disclosures. Sometimes non-disclosure agreements that the developers bring to local officials that prevents anyone in the community from not only understanding, but then planning for energy and water and other environmental aspects that they need to be able to get integrated into that development process to plan for. So we'll end on Fresh Coast Climate Solutions is launching a public-private consortium to get at this issue, where essentially we're hoping to convene stakeholders from both the public and the private sector, uh, community leaders, environmental justice leaders, regionally focused nonprofits, as well as utility planners, infrastructure, and academic experts. And we want to also be selective with a group of more progressively and sustainability focused private entities as well, that would be able to convene to really just share expert information and align on understanding of the expert information, the shared impacts of these developments, and potentially come to a better understanding of how to navigate the complexity of these developments, especially as moratoria eventually will come to an end. So that's something that we're starting, and we'd like to put out there for anyone who's interested in engaging with this. Feel free to reach out to myself or Abby after this call. We'd love to talk with you further about that. But that's the end of our presentation, and I know we have a couple other presenters, but we'd be happy to engage in some discussion afterwards. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gunnar and Abby, and we will definitely engage in more conversation here. But before we get to questions, and we already have a few in the chat, I'm going to turn it over first to Tim Minotis. Let me just say that put your questions in the chat as they come up, so we will have them to refer to later and you don't forget them. I would also note that Jane O'Neill has put links in to a bunch of information that you can use to follow up on this, where to go to connect up with the Southeast Michigan Sierra Club, with Fresh Coast Climate Solutions, and with other things that are happening that you may be interested in. So we will get to your questions as they are coming in fast now. But let's first have Tim Minotis. Tim, as I said before, is the legislative and political director of the Michigan chapter of the Sierra Club. He's been at it for quite a while and has been on top of pretty much everything that goes on in the legislature that has to do with the environment. Focused on that and working for the Sierra Club and working for environmental coalitions that the Sierra Club participates in to impact the legislature and the political situation in Michigan. Tim?
As Fred mentioned, my name is Tim Minotis. I'm the legislative and political director for the Michigan Sierra Club. And as you know, both Gunnar and Abby, mentioned back in 2024, the Michigan State Legislature passed legislation for sales tax and use exemptions for data centers and their equipment here in the state of Michigan, which really, led to the onslaught of data center projects popping up here in the state of Michigan. And since the inception of those bills being signed into law, as was mentioned previously, we have seen a lot of local communities, stand up, push back, ask the right questions around data center projects, which has led to moratoriums, pushback, has led to untransparent processes, both at the local level, but I would also say at the Public Service Commission level in our state legislature. And so what we are seeing now is because of all of that pushback, our state legislature, although the Sierra Club and many of our partners, while the sales tax and use exemptions were going on, and while we were trying to get safeguards implemented into those pieces of legislation, we're warning them about what would come and what would happen. Fortunately, now the legislature is starting to realize and act, and many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats, is a very bipartisan issue, we are starting to see legislation being crafted and introduced here in the Michigan legislature. And so I'm going to talk briefly because I know we're running up on time about what is going on in the legislature in terms of policies that are um, out there right now. So, uh, right before the Christmas break, a group of senators introduced legislation that would limit high consumptive water withdrawals here in the state of Michigan for data centers and really large users, and would require the Public Service Commission to have annual reporting on energy and water use and prevent infrastructure costs from being shifted to residential ratepayers. And so that is in the Michigan Senate right now, and was introduced before Christmas break. We saw legislation too before Christmas break that would straight up in the House, both introduced by a Republican and Democrat, to repeal the sales and use tax exemptions that were passed in 2024. We also heard about the transparency issues at the local level and the issues with NDAs. There was legislation recently introduced to prohibit local officials from signing NDAs related to data center deals. Uh, what was just actually introduced this past Thursday was a moratorium, a bill package that put a moratorium on new data center construction until April 2027. And so there are more policies being crafted right now in the state legislature. And I will say all these bills that I just mentioned, Sierra Club, we are supporting them and do support them. I would expect over the next couple months too, there's going to be more legislation out there regarding directly relating to data centers. And so this issue is not going to go away. It's going to become more and more prevalent. We're seeing lawmakers on both sides of the aisle wanting to take action and speaking up about this issue. Our House Oversight Committee on uh, state investments and corporate subsidies has been holding multiple hearings now, I think 3 or 4 hearings now, on the impacts of data centers, which we testified probably about a month ago at their second committee hearing on data centers and the concerns that we share from the Sierra Club's point of view. And so that's kind of where we are at with the Michigan legislature right now. And of course, want you all to reach out to your lawmakers, encourage them, push them, demand them to take action on these bills and other policies and to implement safeguards. We need to be protecting not only our water and our energy and ratepayers and ensuring they're paying the full cost, but ensure that we are demanding transparent processes and that they're not disrupting our grid and leading to the further build out of fossil fuel infrastructure. The next slide, I want to say, in line with the moratorium. So over the past month, the Michigan Sierra Club has taken a position of calling for a temporary moratorium, pretty much in line with what uh, the bill package that was just introduced lays out. From our perspective, um, local communities have not been able to keep up. The state has not been able to keep up with the rate at which these projects are being either working to be brought online or being presented and pushed. And we know these projects have real world, real community impacts. And so we have made the positioning as the Sierra Club is that we need to put a pause on these projects until our state can keep up and local communities can catch back up with real safeguards and real guardrails across the board for our whole state that protects our water, our energy, our communities, requires transparency. And so we have been calling for a temporary moratorium until our state implements a statewide plan um, for data centers. So I have a link here for you all to sign the temporary moratorium. petition calling on lawmakers to take action and to support the moratorium bills. And then, of course, Sierra Club, we have a annual lobby day always in the spring. We are having our spring lobby day May 13th, and we're going to be pushing lawmakers on the issue of data centers. And so this is an opportunity this spring too to join us, to sign up, and to directly come to Lansing and to talk with lawmakers about the concerns that we have with data centers and to push them on the issue. And so I'll stop right there.
Lobby Day, as always, let me just tell everyone, if you haven't been, the Sierra Club Lobby Day is an extraordinary event. Very well organized. Teams of Sierra Club folks set up in early in the morning in Lansing, well organized with lots of information and leadership to approach meetings with many of the state House and Senate members and with focused issues and information. So I urge everyone who is available on that day to sign up and come to Lansing. We'll get back to Tim with questions in a minute, but a little bit more than a minute. But first, we're going to hear from Brian Smigilski. As I said, Brian is the campaign leader for the Sierra Club in Michigan, and focused particularly on energy and climate issues. He played an important role in the fights up till this time, dealing with the Saline Township data center and with the data center issues generally in front of the Michigan Public Service Commission. And he's going to talk about that and where you can fit into that fight.
Thank you, Fred. Just want to re-uplift everything Tim said, and just to make the point that we are going up against cumulatively trillion-dollar corporations, but this is also our moment. This is one of the most, or if not like the biggest sort of rising tide of coalition of folks from across the political spectrum that are unified against a sort of common enemy, and we've never quite had that. So as big of an environmental, climate, and economic threat that data centers pose, they also are potentially a unifying sort of enemy that for us to fight for a more sustainable world, and to fight against kind of big tech oligarchs that are that people are rightly having suspicions about. So I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to talk a lot about the Michigan Public Service Commission and what we can do there. Really quickly, I wanted to just mention what's happening at the federal level, because there was recently a pledge at the federal administration asking big tech to cover their own electricity costs. And while that is a step in the right direction in that it acknowledges that there is cost sharing happening, in other words, big tech is currently being subsidized by residential ratepayers in many places across the country, it doesn't go far enough at all. So it's voluntary, so there's not any enforcement mechanism. It's kind of just like a window dressing. It ignores climate impacts, air pollution, stranded assets. So there's a real concern that data centers could be built for because AI promises profits to big corporations. However, if those companies, which currently aren't turning a profit, never figure out how to extract profit from the use of AI, then who's going to pay for all of these data centers, all the new gas plants, all the new grid infrastructure? We're talking billions and billions of dollars. Who's going to pay for all of that? And so that's a stranded asset risk or a boom and bust risk. We've already seen that obviously in Michigan, across the Upper Peninsula. There are so many impoverished communities that have been left with the shell of an industry that no longer exists there anymore, that brought temporary jobs, temporary profits, and now has left them and without anything. And so there's a risk there as well. And where these decisions are being made right now, that is going to determine who gets the risks, the financial risks and the environmental risks, and the rules that have to be followed, for decades. All of those decisions are happening over the course of the next year or two at the Michigan Public Service Commission. And the Michigan Public Service Commission is a place that we can have a voice to influence the rules that data center companies and big tech companies have to face if they want to get energy from Michigan. So, currently there are very real, if we go at the current regulatory structure, we're on track to get 250 gigawatts of new gas plants that are in planning. Just for context, in Michigan, we have roughly 7.5 gigawatts of energy load at any given time on average. So 250 gigawatts more gas plants, that's, like 35 times the entire electricity demand at any given time in Michigan, just for data centers. And that's a 30-year commitment that would totally throw off. Right? We're on track to basically totally throw off many of our states' climate targets. North Carolina recently abandoned their state climate targets to accommodate a data center deal. And we are very concerned that while they are not admitting it right now, that our utilities, because of data centers, are going to end up abandoning our climate targets as well. We don't know if that's happening or not, but it does not look like, if they are to build as many data centers as they plan to, they have not shown how they are going to build enough renewables, or if it is even possible to build enough renewables to keep up with that massively increased demand, which would mean they would be building numerous more additional gas plants, delaying coal plants, or requiring an importing of energy from fossil fuel plants across the country. And these are really catastrophic impacts. So moving on from that, so we had many of you here, I'm sure, were part of this growing movement in Michigan to protect our state from data centers. And we had a really historic tide of activism from so many people across the state that culminated on December 18th, when the Michigan Public Service Commission set in place a long list of new protections to both for the Saline data center and for data centers beyond that as well. And these were like really a testament to the efforts and the comments and the people showing up to public hearings and people sending letters to the editor and doing interviews with media and shaping the media environment. We really did something that was incredible. And we got in place a long list of protected conditions that are some of the best in the country. However, the Attorney General, our Sierra Club lawyers, Earth Justice lawyers have found that there is basically a loophole in these protections that DTE plans or likely plans to exploit, which will make it so that they don't have to follow all these protections that we fought so hard for. And so we need the Michigan Public Service Commission to acknowledge that it made this mistake to allow that loophole and to reopen that decision and to make all of these protections enforceable. So this is going to require them sort of admitting that they did not go far enough, that they didn't put the right language in, and reopening. It's called a reopening. And so if you go to this link that's on the screen right now with the QR code, I will also put the link directly in the chat when I'm done, or you might be able to click on it here as well. Sign that, put in your own comment saying that, like, everything that I just talked about. And you can also read through the comment, the model comment, and put that into your own words, or you can just sign it and just keep the drumbeat. We need the commissioners to know that we need them to actually make these rules truly rules. So the reason why this is so important is because what those rules are going to enforce is it's going to make it so that DTE, and it'll set a precedent for consumers as well, have to absorb the financial risk of bringing in, tens of billions of dollars of new grid infrastructure and data centers. Because right now, like the Selene data center project, for instance, is all under the heading of what's called Green Chili Ventures, which is a company I'm sure nobody here has heard of outside of maybe if you're really following this case. However, basically, if Green Chili Ventures goes bankrupt, right now, there isn't a clear, let's say we build, multiple billions of dollars of new gas plants for the Selene data center project, and then Green Chili Ventures goes bankrupt, we might have to pay for that. And so if we make these protections enforceable, that is one of the things that they will be forced to absorb, is take on that financial risk. Another one is that it will make it so that they have to do real renewable planning and show us how they are going to meet all of this new demand with renewables. So the last thing I want to mention here is this general moment that we're in, and with all of this legislation happening, right, and your voices are important there, and with these really impactful decisions, and there's more decisions that are being made right now at the Michigan Public Service Commission, including they are deciding over the next 6 months how much data centers will pay per megawatt of energy they use. And this coincides, right, with why a moratorium is important, why Bernie Sanders is asking for a moratorium at the national level. So what we're seeing is that data center companies and big tech they've got their eyes, on the dollar symbols. They're thinking they're going to make potentially trillions of dollars of profit off of our state's, natural resources, off of our water, off of our climate, off of our energy grid that's, been built for us, not for them. And we need to make sure that we can quantify all of the burdens they put on us. We need time to be able to quantify, how much are they going to deplete our aquifers? How much of our land are they going to destroy? How much pollution are they going to cause in our climate? How much more mining? How are they going to affect the cost of natural gas, or the cost of procuring renewables too quickly? We need time to be able to quantify all of these indirect costs so that we can then require that they pay for them. There isn't a clear mechanism to make them pay for indirect costs. So that is what we need the Michigan Public Service Commission to hear loud and clear. A couple of the things that we can try to make data centers pay for, we need to make them consider paying for, are things like paying for shutoff protection for low-income homes, making them pay for energy efficiency upgrades to offset the grid strain that they're causing. We can get the Michigan Public Service Commission to require them to pay into funds that support energy efficiency upgrades for the most vulnerable among us, direct bill credits, green financing for residents to put renewables on their homes, an aquifer depletion fee. There's just so many things or finally, I'll end on this one, the severance, like a severance style tax. So similar to like the mining industry, right? These are companies that want to benefit off of taking finite natural resources, which are land and water in our climate, right? And profiting off of them. For mining, the standard is that companies have to pay an extra tax for extracting a finite resource. And that happens all across the globe. However, in Michigan, we have the opposite of that, right? For data centers, not only do they not have to pay a severance style tax, they're getting a tax exemption, right? So what we need to happen in the media, what we need the overall narrative to happen across people's social media accounts is that we need them to pay their fair share. But that means no loopholes, no tax loopholes, and also paying for indirect impacts and making that conversation legible. So we need to, this is my kind of three sort of campaign. This is my final slide. This is my three sort of like important seeds for growing this movement, is that we need to situate these incremental campaign goals that I've been talking about at the Michigan Public Service Commission. We need those to stay connected to a long-term vision of systemic change, which is that we don't want, oligarchic big tech companies profiting off of us while, leaving us in ruins. We need to not limit our choices to outcomes that seem likely. Instead, and this is a quote from Joanna Macy, we must focus on what we truly deeply long for and then proceed to take determined steps in that direction. And for what we need to do as a community of activists is we need to use media, public pressure, and direct action to create windows that make dissent at the legislature, dissent within the Michigan Public Service Commission from these institutions that are partially captured possible. We need to make it possible for our commissioners to side with us against billions and billions of dollars. We need to make it possible for legislators to do the same thing. So thanks, everybody. That wraps it up for me.
Thank you, Brian. We have a number of questions that have come in the chat. So I will try to put them together a bit. We have some questions that deal with the kinds of issues that local communities have, who have risen up really in a bunch of cases, including Saline, with that reflect local concerns. I mean, I think most of what we're talking about so far have been concerns that all of us can relate to and are impacted by the prospect of having to pay for the impact on the grid of these data centers and the possibility that they may go under and we'd be stuck with a lot of costs as a result on our utility bills. But there are some also local concerns in some of the particularly rural areas. Noise is one, and somebody asked about that. I know air pollution from generators that are backup power, no matter where on the grid the power comes from. These places have huge, generally anyway, have huge diesel generators. So I'm going to ask our presenters about how significant these problems are, and whether there are other things that local communities should be particularly concerned about. Who would like to take that question? Gunnar, do you?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So noise pollution is certainly a concern, especially for the larger hyperscale type of facilities. We briefly flashed up different types of data centers, but I'm going to focus on the largest hyperscales that are going to be in the hundreds of megawatts of capacity. And that can certainly lead to noise pollution as well as light pollution. If you can imagine just the amount of, and this is why it's so energy intensive, the cooling that's required to cool down these servers that are operating 24/7, and think of the sound of like your air conditioning or perhaps even your computer as a small scale, and then scale that up astronomically. And those can lead to serious noise pollution concerns, as well as the backup generators that you mentioned, Fred. We're seeing a disturbing trend in a lot of new developments across the country relying on backup generators and other natural gas generators on site to power their facilities. So that is a serious concern. There's a good NPR report that came out in January about what is it like to be inside of a data center, and it gives a little bit of that inkling into what it's like.
And just to build on that, every hyperscale data center is going to require a massive amount of energy generation to be built for, which all bring their own bring local impacts that we're not even seeing yet. And so really we have to think about the local impact of a data center as ground zero. It's like the tip of an iceberg that requires we build out this huge, the rest of the iceberg comes after we build the data center gets built. And that all has local impacts as well, including massive water consumption from the thermoelectric generation from like a gas plant or coal plants, more mining, more fracking, more transmission in places we wouldn't have otherwise needed it, things like that.
Well, speaking of water, Jan O'Connell asked uh, uh, how effective the enclosed water systems that are proposed, and I think that's true of the proposed for the Selene hyperscale data center and some of the other ones. How effective is that in conserving water? What is it? What are the potential downsides of enclosed water systems?
Yeah, I'll just follow up. I'll just continue kind of what I was saying. So those types of water cooling systems, and I might be leaving some details out, so please feel free to fill out those details if you know of them. But those types of closed loop systems don't cool as efficiently. They require more megawatts to be used per like processing power, and so there is a trade-off where more energy has to be used than if they were to be using a not closed loop water system. And the reason why that is important for water is precisely the reason I just mentioned, which is really that the majority of water consumption, consumptive water use, where we're wasting water, is coming from that thermoelectric generation being used to, like we said, we're expecting to see 250 gigawatts, right, which is like 250 more major cities worth of electricity generation coming just from new gas plants. And that's not even mentioning, the fact that the Campbell coal plant was delayed and is being kept online to they're claiming to because we're going to need it for AI, and these facilities use 1 to tens of millions of gallons per day. So even if you were to get rid of all water consumption and make a completely closed loop, you're using more energy, and every megawatt of energy that you generate or that you require, that you need to use for the data center, has an outsized consumptive water impact.
We have a question from Monica that I think reflects what a lot of the folks in many of the townships where that are the places where these hyperscale data centers are proposed are asking. Essentially, why us? Why is this being planned for pristine, as she says, land, farmland, or rural land? Why not put these in abandoned factories or in other areas where the land is not rural? And I would note that I think Gunnar, Abby, that your presentation mentioned, I think, in one of the slides, the possibility that the big cities will be sites for some of these in coming years, though it hasn't yet. So the question is, why is it that the townships are the ones that are so far proposed for these, and should we be aiming to put them elsewhere? Abby, Gunnar, you have.
Yeah, so back to the data center map that we put up there, I would say that the clusters of most developments actually do take place in close proximity to urban centers, because generally it has more robust fiber optic cables and transmission and distribution access for interconnection to the grid. But for the case of Selene, for example, yes, out there in the farmland, ease of large plots of land for especially like data centers like the Selene development, it's 250 acres. So the largest hyperscale facilities need space, as well as what I mentioned earlier about connection to the grid and fiber optic cables. So I would propose that that's the biggest reason for those hyperscalers is they need land, because we're talking about some cases dozens of buildings and hundreds of acres.
Yeah, and I'll just add to, I think that, Gunnar's totally right that it's cheap, vast, pre-cleared land, vast that house these for the amount of acres that are needed for some of these projects, such as the Selene one. I would also just say it's especially like lower taxes and regulations. Rural areas also often have lower property taxes and fewer zoning restrictions. than urban areas do, which is like reducing operational costs. Also, for them, less barriers to entry because of the zoning restrictions. And so, like, I would say that's also, one of the reasons as well why they look at more rural areas too, is because the zoning is more favorable for them too.
There are a couple questions about things that could be done. One was about geothermal as a way to cool. Would that get around some of the problems with water? Is that a realistic demand to be made of these centers?
My understanding is that it does help. It does on site. Again, it doesn't influence how much water is being used by coal or gas plants powering them, but that it is a way of mitigating some of the consumptive water use on site.
Okay, there was a question in the chat about crypto. We haven't really seen that much in the discussion, but don't they use the same kinds of places and have the same kind of impact as the AI data centers? And is that a problem in Michigan?
Uh, and anyone feel free to, piggyback off me too. Yes. I mean, essentially, there with crypto mining, I mean, these are just big warehouses, computer. I mean, they're same thing. They're computers that are, and so, yes, I mean, these same facilities require a lot of water, energy intensive. They're very noisy too. Um, for some that may have seen like in the news, there's crypto mining facility in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is actually in the Upper Peninsula. This is actually becoming a big issue with crypto mining facilities. But one of the big issues up in the Upper Peninsula is the noise pollution coming from these crypto mining facilities. And so many of I would say they're they're more or less the same. These crypto mining facilities and the data centers used for AI, they come with the same issues, and it's an issue that we are seeing and hearing more of about in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I will say, if we're talking on the legislative side, uh, there is legislation that got a hearing before Christmas break here on the right they call it the right to mine bill package, which pretty much um is what it sounds like, is the right to crypto mine here in the state of Michigan, where like local units of government can't put ordinances up around these facilities, and so there's a package of bills that would essentially deregulate crypto mining here in the state of Michigan. So that is something we are following too. And also in that bill package, I will just say there's language in it that um, pretty much says that crypto mining facilities receive the same regulations as data centers do in the state of Michigan. So essentially they're to be treated the same. And so, and that is because we don't have anything on data centers here in the state of Michigan. So I do want to flag that there are bills around crypto mining facilities to essentially deregulate here. But yes, the same issues, and it should be something we should all be concerned about.
I think we have a question from Monica asking whether what the likelihood is that these hyperscale, the big data centers will become obsolete quickly due to changes in computing technology. I think you've seen some developments in China that raise questions about our approach to the computing centers and the way that energy is used on it. And of course, there's a lot of talk about computer systems that are much more reduced in size, nanotechnology of some sort. Do we have a sense of of what the possibilities are that that this whole system may be unnecessary or much reduced in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, I can talk on that. I think that that is the largest risk that we have right now, and the least. I mean, it's talked about, but it's sort of, I think, the least talked about and least understood. And it's the why the huge red flag is here with Green Chili Ventures being like this, like for a major company like Oracle and OpenAI using a small, basically something like a shell company, a company that exists what looks like to be for this exact risk. If the demand goes away for the data center, that they have in a limited liability corporation that can take the fall. And so closing that loophole is really important. But to your question around technology, yes, it comes, I think, mostly from the software side. So we've seen, like Fred was mentioning, with DeepSeek Alpha, this happened last year. They were able to create a model or an AI that used 1/10 of the amount of energy with the same results as ChatGPT. And so the implication there is that you don't actually need all of this energy, these data centers, as much of these data centers or as much new gas plants or coal plants. And so if we build hundreds of billions of dollars of, massively resource intensive buildings, and then the software develops and AI no longer requires so much energy per inquiry, then yeah, there's a real risk that they're just doing so. But then why is it happening? Is the other question. What it seems like is the our federal administration and the way that they think of AI is that we're in kind of like an arms race. And the logic behind AI right now is that bigger models. So basically, also, most of the data center energy demand is coming from training the models, not from the individual use of the models. So training a cloud or a Gemini or a Chat GPT requires sourcing from like all of the internet's data. And so the data centers really are being used right now primarily as like that is like the AI school. It's like how AI is absorbing all of our information. It's like this sucking hub of just, copying the internet a million times over and running it through their algorithms. And that's what's taking all this energy. But what if we get to the point where the returns on just copying the internet over and over and over again in these larger and larger language models, those returns are diminishing, right? The bigger they used to be able to just get bigger, more training data meant a smarter AI. Now they're running into this issue where that's not the case as much anymore. And so they need like smarter training data and they need protected data. So it's not like a game of telephone. So they're training off of data. They're training off of an internet that was most of the content at this point now is AI generated, and it's losing some of its like anchoring to reality. So all this to say that, there's a real concern that the data centers and the infrastructure being built for them are not going to actually be needed long term for AI, for the AI big tech companies to continue to make their profits. Once they have AI that is efficient and works, and they've outcompeted the rest of the world, by training our AI the fastest, and then getting us hooked on their AI and getting companies dependent on their version of AI. Do they still need to keep investing in our energy grid? Do they still need these data centers? Is there any jobs that are going to be there? That's, I think, one of the biggest concerns, and why it's so paramount that we put long-term financial risk on the data center companies through large load tariffs, through rate structures, and through specific financial liability agreements that we've got from all of our work that we did. We got this commitment, but there's a loophole in it. And again, that's why we need the MPSC to acknowledge that loophole and tie off that loose end, because keeping financial liability with them for that reason is it's incredibly, incredibly important.
All right, we're coming to the end of our program. We've got a lot of information. I think we've got some links to both further information to contact Fresh Coast, to contact the Sierra Club. We got at least a couple of immediate things that everyone can do. And that is weigh in with the petition for a moratorium that Tim Minotis has created, and that this Sierra Club has posted, something that would support that action by the state legislature, and weigh in with the Michigan Public Service Commission that Brian has laid out so articulately. Is it still one of the most important places where decisions are being made that affect all the new data centers that are being proposed. So I hope everyone does that. I hope that you at least consider getting involved with the Southeast Michigan Sierra Club. Or if not, if you're not in our area, with the Michigan chapter of the Sierra Club and other groups within the Sierra Club. And I hope that to see all of you at next month's program and in the future with the programs that we produce each month.